Yeah. Eggs are hot, okay? I'm gonna blow on them. Good. Good boy.
Egg.
That's right.
Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to talk about transitioning your baby from formula or breast milk to other sources of nutrition, a process commonly referred to as weaning. We'll talk about how to gradually cut bottle or breastfeedings over the course of weeks and months during that transition period, the best foods to start with, as well as which foods to avoid, how much food, what size pieces of food. We'll also cover why we made the personal choice to go directly from breast milk to solids without using purees as an intermediate step. And when I say no purees, I mean we don't use them at all. We don't buy them, we don't make them ourselves at home, and we'll get into why that is. Now this is part one of a two-part video. We ended up having so much to talk about on this topic, we thought it would be better to split it up into more digestible chunks, pun intended. So in the next part, we'll talk about the 8 common allergens and the lowest risk way to introduce them into your baby's diet. And then we'll get into the elephant in the room when it comes to starting your baby on solids, choking. So be sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you'll know when part 2 comes out. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Up until around 1 year of age, your child will be getting the majority of their nutrition from formula or breast milk, or a combination of the two. We'll make a separate video about a system called BabyWise, which we use to structure Xander's feeding, napping, and playtime routines when he was an infant. But here I want to focus on specifically that period of transition from infant to toddler, where they're going from mostly inactive and stationary to rolling, scooting, crawling, and walking around, and all the other various sorts of movement that your baby might perform. Formula and breast milk are both excellent whole sources of nutrition that provide infants with everything they need early on, and studies have shown little difference between formula-fed and breastfed babies in terms of their overall growth and their long-term ability to thrive. But as your child becomes more active, they'll need greater amounts of nourishment to keep up with the increasing demands of a growing body, and pretty soon, formula or breast milk alone won't meet those demands anymore. Eating food also develops the muscles in their mouth and tongue in a different way than nursing does, so this is a key step in learning those new movements. So the traditional approach to introducing real food into a baby's diet involves purees. You know, that ooey gooey, mushy, gushy stuff you'll find in tiny glass jars lining the shelves of your local grocery store. Now you might be thinking that the reason pureed baby food exists in the first place is because babies don't have teeth, and you'd be right. But you know what they do have? Gums. And gums work pretty well as long as you start off with small pieces of soft foods like pastas, scrambled eggs, bananas, and well-cooked vegetables. Of course, you should absolutely steer clear of hard, chewy, or adhesive foods like peanut butter, raw apples, nuts, tortilla chips, syrups, or caramel. And in case you haven't heard, never give a baby honey until they're at least a year old because it's a botulism risk. The general rule of thumb is that if you can squish it easily between your fingers and it separates into a substance that's not sticky, then it is soft and pliable enough for a baby who's just starting out with solids. You'll also want to keep an eye on the size of the pieces to make sure that they don't pose a choking hazard. One great example is grapes. A whole grape can pretty easily slide down someone's throat and get stuck, but a grape that's cut into fourths is nice and soft on the inside and no longer holds that rounded shape that might cause problems. So generally anything round or cylindrical that looks like it could form a plug if swallowed whole needs to be cut in a different way or into a smaller set of pieces. Now I realize that skipping purees altogether is somewhat controversial in some circles, but let's talk about the benefits. First of all, we don't skip purees for any overt health or dietary reason, or because we're holding some sort of grudge against the Gerber company. Although, funny enough, people have told us they think Xander looks like the Gerber baby. But we've never even made our own purees at home, and that's been a deliberate decision, guided in part by a book called Baby-Led Weaning. It's been out for over a decade now, and I'll put a link in the description in case you want to check it out, but I think this approach has become more popular in recent years since this book was released, and it makes some pretty compelling arguments for why it's good to start off with solids. You know, when I'm thinking about things for babies, I like to think in terms of what we do as adults. So we don't sit down at a restaurant and open wide so our waiter can shovel sludge into our mouths. So why should we teach our children to eat that way? I enjoy a nice bowl of applesauce as much as the next guy. Maybe a little zing of cinnamon in there to set it off just right. But at least I'm feeding myself. And usually I don't spill it all over the place. I pride myself on that and the fact that my wife only occasionally has to clean up after me. That's because I've been practicing for a long time. Now, I don't mean to brag here, but think about all of the skills you need to feed yourself. Manual dexterity, hand-eye coordination, chewing, tongue control, decision-making when there's 3 or 4 things on your plate. So when you're weaning your child off of formula or breast milk, it just so happens that they're beginning to develop their fine motor skills at right around the same time. Coincidence? Well, maybe, but why would I want to prevent my child from practicing those skills by spoon-feeding them when I can instead encourage them to explore and learn by letting them feed themselves? Now, all this is not to say you won't have to help your baby with a fork or a spoon at first. It will take some time for them to develop that initial pincer grasp, which is gripping with the thumb and forefinger, and it's typically the first step in picking things up on their own. But just because you're spoon feeding doesn't mean you need to use purees. If you've ever spoon fed an infant, you know that if you're real lucky, you'll get maybe half of whatever you're feeding them into their mouth. Even that's probably an overestimation, and the rest just goes everywhere. So when you're spoon feeding solids as opposed to purees, you can cut pieces of that same food and put them in front of them so they have a chance to practice picking them up on their own if they want to. You can't do that with blended sweet potato or pureed carrots. Yes, it's going to be a little messier than it would otherwise, but you have a baby. Messes are part of your life now. That's a reality I'm still in the process of embracing. And we have an almost 2-year-old. Bottom line, think of it this way. If they're making a mess, it's a good thing because it means they're learning. It's this exploration, this trial and error that we all go through when we're learning something new. And once they do learn, not only do mealtimes become easier, because instead of spoon feeding them while your food gets cold, you set a plate in front of them and let them go to town so you can all eat at the same time. Not only have you empowered your child to be more self-sufficient, you've also given them the ability to look, taste, touch, and feel, and to develop their palate, their sense of texture, and you're letting them stop eating when they reach a feeling of fullness. When you're spoon feeding them, you don't necessarily know when they've had enough. You're going by the size of the container instead of the size of their little stomach. And maybe you're just saying, okay, we've got 4 more spoonfuls here, let's finish this up, even if it means they're overeating as a result. Fun fact, you actually have receptors that signal to your brain the amount of stretching that's happening in your stomach as you eat, and that's part of how you know you're full. So transferring that control over to your child of deciding for themselves when it's time to stop allows them to form healthier habits. And if you're like me and you cringe at the thought of wasting food, hate to break it to you, you just gotta let it go. Waste is gonna happen, it's the nature of the beast, and as you can probably tell, that's another thing I'm learning to embrace. So now we've covered some of the main benefits of transitioning directly to solids. Let's get into the specifics of how we did it and why we decided on this particular approach. So as an infant, Xander was nursing every 3 hours or so. That's 24/7 day and night. The first thing we did was to start cutting his overnight feeds. We got down to just 1 feed in the middle of the night, and then as we were working on eliminating that last one, we began spacing out his daytime feeds to 3.5 hours apart, then 4 hours apart, and so on. So to start him on solids, we began sitting him down at the table with us at mealtimes. He was in daycare at this point, so we started with just dinner time, and then on weekends we would go 2 or 3 meals a day. So maybe some soft scrambled eggs at breakfast, a bit of fruit at lunch, cut up real small of course, and then some pasta for dinner or something like that. And it's important to note here that we did not replace nursing with table meals at first. So he would nurse and then we would sit down to eat. The reason we did it in that order is so that he wouldn't lose interest in nursing after he'd eaten. And that way we could make sure he still had that baseline of nutrition from nursing and didn't need to rely on the small amount of food he was actually able to take in at meals. Once he was able to feed himself and eat larger amounts of food, we started cutting the nursing sessions before meals. Then, when we started noticing during the quote-unquote snacking sessions between meals that he was mainly comfort nursing and not actually taking in the same amounts he had previously, we cut those feedings out too. And where necessary, we replaced them with morning or afternoon snacks. Our daycare helped us out a lot with this by modifying his schedule as it shifted, so that during the week while he was there, he had a pretty close match to what we were doing at home over the weekend. And this whole period lasted till maybe 12 to 15 months, somewhere in that time frame, when we finally got down to 2 nursing sessions, and the last 2 to go were the ones at morning wake up and right before bed. To a certain degree, Xander had begun to lose interest in breastfeeding as he started to eat more, so definitely feel your child out when it comes to how interested they are. But to mitigate any issues, Sarah would bring Xander downstairs to eat breakfast first thing in the morning right after he woke up, so he didn't really get a chance to miss what had been his usual nursing time. To cut that feeding before bed, we really just tried to make sure he'd gotten a solid dinner and had eaten enough that he wasn't going to bed hungry. Some parents offer a bottle of milk before bed to ease this transition period, but Xander never really took to cow's milk, so we didn't go that route. When it came to filling in the hours between meals, we relied on puffs a lot, which is a type of baby food made from puffed grains, almost like a cereal, that comes in a bunch of different mild flavors, dissolves easily so it isn't a choking hazard, and they usually come in a nice plastic container that's resealable, so it travels well. They're a great size for practicing that pincer grasp. And in Xander's case, once he had the full hand grip down, he'd just shove them into his mouth in handfuls. So whether it's with puffs or any other food, if you do notice your baby eating too fast, keep in mind that it's okay to ration them by only putting a few bites in front of them at a time until they learn to pace themselves. So by a couple of months after his first birthday, Xander was fully divested of his interest in breastfeeding and ready to begin a new chapter in his nourishment journey. In part 2 of this video, we'll talk specifics on how we handle mealtimes now, and we'll offer a few pointers on how to manage some of the dangers parents might worry about, like choking and allergens. If you found this video helpful, be sure to leave us a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed yet, we'd love for you to join us for lots more baby and child-related videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.